Hi, thank you for joining me this afternoon. Today, I'm going to be giving a retrospective and account of an unfortunate incident that happened at UC Berkeley last year in September. For those of you who would like to follow along, you can go ahead and follow this URL. I have the slides online for those who'd like to read ahead. Has everyone got that? Anybody not got that? Great, I'm moving on. So before I start, I'd like to thank a whole bunch of people for making this happen and for supporting me in this. But perhaps most importantly, I want to thank USENIX for having me here, and especially for this cartoon in the comic book that they gave us with our registration materials. Very relevant. So what happened? Short version is we had a co-located customer system in the UC Berkeley campus data center catch fire. This happened on 18 September 2015 at about 6:45 in the evening. It activated the fire suppression systems, the emergency power off, which then proceeded to take the campus down for all online services for the weekend. Recovery actually proceeded really quickly, and we were back up by Monday morning. Investigations proceeded through the summer of this year with the final settlement agreement signed sometime in the fall. The attorneys won't tell me when. We were covered in the local press. This is the student newspaper. They're really curious when students can't seem to submit their homework over a weekend. We also got a mention in a National Fire Prevention Agency white paper that was issued 2 months afterward. So people know about us. So I mentioned the settlement. There are some caveats here. There are certain things I will not talk about because it is covered under a confidentiality agreement between us and the involved non-UC Berkeley parties. So I will not be talking about these things. Things I can tell you about. I can tell you what kind of commodity components we use, because no one's gonna worry that if I tell you that we use Intel CPUs. If we don't use Intel CPUs, I think there's something wrong with us right now. Someone asked me earlier today, "It really sucks, John, but how often does this happen?" It doesn't happen every day, but it happens a lot. I'm not going to go through all these examples. You can look these up, click on the slides. These have all happened. Certainly, we have had incidents at our own campus over the last 15 years that have been significant and disruptive. The question is, they're probably going to happen to you at some point, one way or another. And the question is, are you ready? We've engaged, in the process of this investigation, we have engaged in extensive communication with a whole bunch of parties, ranging from attorneys, investigators, the campus fire marshal, the manufacturer, everybody. And I mentioned our system integrator twice because apparently I can't tell when I make typos. Two takeaways is that there were several post-mortems and investigations as a result of the number of parties involved. As a result, there was a lot of email just from the investigations alone. My manager over there, say hi, Shane.
Hi, everybody.
He had to read most of it.
It was insane.
The second question, the first question I actually got was when I say a system caught fire, the next question is what? And all I can say is that one of my research group's servers caught fire. And this is the first time we've acknowledged this publicly. A lot of people on our campus know this and haven't disclosed it, which is good because otherwise legal would be after them. But they've also been really good to us about it. Because even though it wasn't our fault necessarily, it happened on our watch. That said, it has been really sensitive. And all I can say from that is that everybody on campus, everybody involved in this entire event has learned something from it, hopefully constructively. These are the things I can tell you about our server that caught fire. It was a generic commodity server built out of completely 100% commodity parts. We bought it a few years ago. We moved it down to the campus data center. We had turned it into a low memory box for a researcher, and we're going to turn it back into a big memory box for a system called Spark that we developed in-house and has spun out into an open source project. The irony that we run a system called Spark has not been lost upon us. And just for fair disclosure, we also work on another project in the hardware architecture group called Firebox. So we've been catching some grief over our naming scheme lately. This was part of a larger order of 30 systems, and for our research group, these were our workhorse servers. This was over 90% of our local on-site compute capability. I can't tell you how it caught fire. Well, I can, but I'm not allowed to. But obviously, something went really wrong. And that is all I can tell you about that until I get approval from the other 16 parties involved in this. What I can give you is excerpts out of our detailed timeline. So I start off with me as the last customer leaving the campus data center at about 6:20 to get dinner. 6:45, and we're not exactly sure when because we don't have access to all the forensics. That's when the system caught fire. Within minutes, the fire suppression system and emergency power off systems had activated. For those of you who are wondering, that's about 4,000 pounds of FM200 chemical dispersed through 10,000 square feet of data center space. Now, I'm at dinner, so I'm not looking at my phone until I get back to the office at 8:30, at which point I notice, a bunch of services are down. I wonder if it's another random EECS department/campus routing flap. That's when I saw the first report of a halon dump. It wasn't actually a halon dump, but that's a minor detail. Maybe not, but maybe it's still a false alarm. Maybe it just went off by accident. Maybe nothing really caught fire. Yeah. Then you see messages like this from your university campus system status page. At that point, I realized that there had been a fire, and that occurred approximately 28 minutes after I left. This was a sobering realization for many reasons, not the least of which is that maybe I did something stupid, which is something that came up over and over again as the evening went on towards the midnight. So how bad was it? Everything, what was down? Everything, pretty much. Even if it remained up without single sign-on, you couldn't get to it. You couldn't get to Google services for Edu. You couldn't get to Wi-Fi. DHCP on campus networks was down. Pretty much everything was down, including the campus website. Our departmental mail list server was dependent upon an Oracle database in the campus data center. No mail lists for mass announcements. No EECS Jabber server. We hadn't turned on the Google Talk services for campus yet. But certain things did work. Our basic IP connectivity continued to work. We still had working DNS. We still had working NTP. People who paid AT&T money, we still had AT&T Wi-Fi. Mail still worked. So if you could get to your mail other ways, whether maybe you had an active session going already or you had an IMAP client, you got announcements. Our campus emergency communication systems continued to operate, mostly because they're hosted off-site at other locations or through third-party services. Any departments that had their own in-house services, those all continued to work unless they had some kind of random dependency. Mostly this is here for the funny picture, but for my research group, this took down a huge Jenkins instance that supports a couple of large open source projects. If you use Jenkins, you may have never seen this picture before. That is the picture that Jenkins pops up when it is displeased. Fortunately, Friday night, so most developers, not operations, but most developers are off enjoying their Friday nights. So back to our story, I basically had run out of things to do. Went to the campus data center as a helpful colleague, not knowing that our system had caught fire. Met a whole bunch of other people trying to do the same thing, including the executive director of environmental health and safety, who I met that night for the first time. We were eventually let into the building, but before that, my manager drove by, having gone out on an evening with his wife and friends, and wished me good luck. Thanks. So at that point, we were let in. The non-essential staff were allowed to enter. The data center staff on duty at the time that I left was finally released to go home. And of course, he had to make the joke of, "You were the last one out. What did you do?" Which we all thought was really funny. If you've never been in a data center now, though, we all finally got to go in. And it's about 90 degrees on the ground floor with a data center on the third floor. If you've never been in a data center after the power's gone out, you may not know that the HVAC turns off too. And that 10,000 square feet of systems not being cooled has a lot of residual heat. Apparently, when the fire department entered, it was 120 Fahrenheit. This would have some repercussions later that maybe I will talk about if we have time, and maybe someone will remind me to answer that question about why it's a problem. But we had one real big problem to solve. We had to figure out what caught fire, what set off all of this to go down. And the fire marshal and the fire department actually thought that there was a false alarm because they came in expecting to find something smoking. They came in to find something maybe with some residual flame, something smoldering. The fire suppression system was so good that there was no outward sign of something having caught fire other than the slight smell of overheated electronics. This also turned out to be hard to do because when you release a gaseous fire suppression system like FM200, it will then proceed to set off every single smoke detector in your facility. So now you have to go through clicking a button, maybe only one of 2 buttons on a fire alarm control panel, going backwards through time to find out those 2 fire sensors that set off your alarm. Also, we had no camera system, so we couldn't see which hot aisle might have had some kind of sign like smoke to tell us which row it was in. But it was 11 p.m., and we needed to find this out. So you got a dozen people. It's only 90 degrees. What do? Do a linear search. You kind of know which area it's in. I happen to have a rack in that area. I said, hey, why don't we just get my rack out of the equation? Nothing's wrong in my rack. I don't have any kind of weird experimental equipment. So I opened up my rack. Yeah. I think I know what caught fire. I would show you some pictures showing you what I discovered when I opened up my rack. Out of an abundance of caution to avoid pissing off legal, not just my legal, but everyone else's legal. We're not going to show them to you, but they are pretty horrific, or maybe in your case, maybe for some of you, kind of entertaining. But yeah, something really bad happened, and it was bad, like really bad. And until I saw this, I didn't actually think that one of my systems had really caught fire. I can tell you that was complete and total loss of the server, $10,000 of server gone. It also had additional heat damage on servers adjacent to it. It was that bad of a fire. But it was actually contained within the system itself. So it did not set the entire rack on fire, which I'm really, really happy about. The next 3 slides are redacted because they concern details of our initial investigation. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I get asked this question. And thus began the flow of information to our campus leadership, such as our campus CIO, who had a legitimate need to know which department had a machine that caught fire. And by the way, what's your name again? And to be honest, I was actually pretty comfortable with this. My real concern was, oh God, please don't be sending this to some news rag. Please don't be commenting to some reporter, not to the student newspaper, who are notorious for getting all of this wrong the next day. This left me as sort of the man on the scene. I had to answer a lot of questions, both to environmental health and safety and the campus fire marshal. So here's my information, here's my manager, here's my department chair, here's my business card, and would you like my phone number too? The upshot, though, is that we found the ignition source by midnight. For having been let into the facility only at 10:30, that was pretty good. Recovery could begin, starting with HVAC and power, which turned out to be the first major problem. How do you turn on HVAC if your HVAC controller system has no power? It's kind of hard. I still don't know how they did it. I am pretty sure they either had found a large UPS or they had a really long extension cord going up to the UPS room. Not quite sure. By the way, the UPS room, which is a separate facility within that building in a separate fire zone, kept on running without HVAC. If you know anything about UPS charging circuits, you know that generates a lot of heat. They didn't restore power until early that morning. Some more stuff I had to redact because it involved the investigation. Nothing like having to call up an assistant dean of the College of Engineering at midnight to tell him what the hell happened. I'm sure he appreciated the call. I'm pretty sure he wished that it hadn't happened. We then unplugged everything. $300,000 of systems unplugged. So this brings us to where we are right now. Basically, everything's down, nothing works, and not a whole lot of compute is down that my people can't use anymore. And we had a major conference deadline, actually for a USENIX conference, 7 days after that. That was really fun. The next day, recovery began, and everyone was really, really good to us. Mostly because, I'm pretty sure it's because we showed them the system, we showed them all the horrible damage, so they got some kind of little bit of entertainment, for having to show up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. But by Monday, things were working. Very few systems were lost. And as someone told me, it's okay, they were old and they tasted like sour grapes anyway. Everyone kept their jobs. Things that really, really needed to work in emergency worked. And most importantly, nobody died and there were no injuries aside from a lot of lost sleep and a lot of stress. Now, I mentioned earlier that Friday evening was lucky. Actually, no, I didn't mention that. We were lucky that this happened on a Friday evening. Why is that? Two things: reduced business impact during recovery and staff availability. While we still had students who needed to do things on the weekend, everyone involved in the business side of a university goes home at Friday at 5, and we don't see them until 8 in the morning on Monday. So they weren't doing anything. So campus procurement, campus accounts receivable, financial, legal, they all went home anyway. They didn't care. Well, they did, but they didn't need to get work done. Students needed to get work done, but it really cut down the stress on staff trying to bring systems up in an orderly fashion. There was no rush to do it. We could take our time to do it right. Staff, we were really lucky this happened at 6:30 or so, because that's about when a lot of our shifts change for any of our shift workers. So that includes things like HVAC, campus electricians, additional data center staff. We were basically had double the amount of staff that we would have had any other time. And people like me who don't work on shift, we had enough time to reconsider our weekend plans and show up for the weekend. Things that didn't work, though. The smoke detectors were not fast enough to detect a major problem. I don't have video to show you, mostly because we can't get it off of the data center manager's phone yet. But if you've ever seen the TV show Lost, and you've seen the smoke monster, basically we had a smoke monster leaving the back of our rack and going straight up to the ceiling to do who knows what. We do plan to put in a better smoke detection system, but even then, our data center is not staffed between late evening and early morning. So if we have an event during those hours, it doesn't actually help us. I mentioned that the automatic EPO didn't hit everything. The fire department had to hit the manual EPO. So a lot of systems remained up and running despite the supposed power off. A lot of people reported that their racks continued pinging and doing work during the supposed outage. I mentioned the UPS room and the circular dependencies. The fact that people couldn't get into Wi-Fi was a huge problem, though, without authentication. There was no way for a lot of people who no longer use wired internet for anything to find out what was going on unless they happened to have a phone and knew where to look. And I really wish I had the video to show you, because it's one of the few things I could share, and it's outstanding. It's just outstanding. So in the next 2 months after that, we basically started the investigative process. We notified our vendors. We engaged with our campus legal services and risk management services. Throughout this, our department chair maintained in contact with us to figure out what was going on, what's the status of things, so that she could communicate both up and down and laterally to everyone on campus. By November, though, we were able to get back up online. All of our systems, we've replaced all of our systems. I can't give you details of that other than to say that everybody involved was happy about it. Costs and impact. On a monetary basis, this actually had very little impact. In the grand scheme of even a public university, $100,000 to $200,000 of money is actually kind of small. But when it comes out of a data center group's operating budget, it becomes a big deal. What was more important was that it was a few weeks before our fire suppression system was recharged and replenished with new chemical, which meant that our only protection in that case was water, which is there to prevent loss of building, not loss of equipment. Anyone who tells you that dry pipe systems are okay for equipment with EPO is lying to you. I think the biggest cost that we incurred, though, was the fact that we had to move a number of academic deadlines and homework deadlines across thousands of classes, hundreds of faculty, and approximately 30,000 students on campus. Telling the registrar's office that they have to move the add-drop deadline for classes that semester 3 days actually had a huge amount of impact beyond just the academics, beyond just the registrar's department. It affected pretty much every system on campus that wasn't related to financial. Actually, no, it did affect financial because of financial aid. To our group, we lost all of our compute. Our AWS bill doubled. We borrowed a lot of systems from a lot of other groups, and we owe a lot of favors still in return for that. But somehow, despite all of this, we managed not to miss a single paper submission or publication deadline. And for that, a lot of our grad students and researchers are incredibly happy. Let's see, we can skip the first 2 bits, but the biggest things We engaged with a whole bunch of different parties on campus to deal with this event. The first thing we noticed that there were huge gaps in expertise and experience between different disciplines, and what I will simply call impedance matches, mismatches between priority and goals. Everybody wanted the same thing for whatever definition of the same thing we could agree upon that day, but we didn't quite know how to get there yet. I am not an attorney. Probably no one else in this room is an attorney either. If you are an attorney, raise your hand. I didn't think so. Attorneys are not engineers. Investigators are neither. We don't know about each other's specialties. So to say something that might sound quite silly and ridiculous, I answered a lot of questions about what I can only describe as the computer industry. And it really was about everything wide-ranging from how are servers made and who makes CPUs that you use. Things that everyone in this room takes for granted, I cannot take for granted. I could not take for granted with any other population. We also discovered a large, most people in this room, I would say, it's on the wiki, it's in the knowledge base, you all know what to do, right? Just nod your head and say yes. Okay, thank you. Not the case with attorneys. Not the case with insurance investigators. They don't do wikis. They don't understand digital signatures. DocuSign is new black magic for them. If you use DocuSign, you might also agree that DocuSign is new black magic for you too. So an interesting problem we ran into is we had to provide about 2 years' worth of email communications with the parties involved to the investigators and to legal. So to get to the bottom point, we cannot just send them a gzip inbox file. We can't give them a maildir directory. They don't know what to do with it. What they wanted was PDFs. Because this is the standard in the legal industry, is you have hard copies or replicas of hard copies. This didn't really work for us either. So we found a middle ground, which involved abusing our departmental list server to use its list archiving features to create an easy-to-read archive with threading and ordering and all of the information needed to do forensics on our email even to everybody involved. I've never seen an attorney so happy about a mailing list. And there's some significance to the fact that we use our departmental list email server and not our off-campus Google services for this. And if I have time, you can ask me about that. It basically comes down to who on campus has access to Google services as an administrator versus who has access in my department to this list server. It's about an order of magnitude difference. Now, I also spoke to impedance mismatches. And I'm going to sum it up with some people are concerned with relationships, other people are concerned about assets and recovery. We all really did want the same thing, but we all have different starting points. I care about relationships. An insurance company might care about recovery of assets. An attorney might care about defending names and reputations. And individually, these are all really reasonable goals for those professions. Together, they can cause conflict, and they can derail progress. Fortunately, it did not in this case. Everybody got on board on the same train really early on. And if I knew why, I would bottle it up and sell it to every single group who has to do this kind of investigation and make a lot of money. So the question is, what do we really want? Everybody wanted to make things right. And the way we define things as making things right is basically making sure this doesn't happen again, making sure that the university is made whole again, both at the data center and for everyone who lost hardware, finding out what happened, and ultimately being able to work with each other again in the future, because all of these parties involved, they've all been trusted partners and in some cases friends for decades between us and the university. We like working with them. We don't want to stop working with them. But to go into the next slide, luckily, this did not involve malice. This involved an unfortunate incident. But as the previous talk mentioned, we are not a regulated industry. So we don't have an NTSB like a regulated airline industry does. We don't have an FDA. We don't have some external third-party body sort of leading and guiding us down this road. We had to make it up as we went along. And we're really lucky that this turned out as well as it did. Another detail that I have to redact, because it involves the investigation, obviously there was one. There was a good outcome. which is that we still like each other, and we're still willing to work with each other, and we settled this amicably. That's probably the best outcome you can ask for when something like this happens. And all the equipment got replaced, which makes my research group really happy. We've already talked about tons of areas of improvement. Probably the one that I haven't mentioned is, if we had known what to look for exactly in our IPMI logs, our system event logs, amidst the thousands of, say, ECC errors and reboots and power supply faults and power supply replacements that we have to do every day, we probably would have caught this in the first month, as opposed to being caught by it with our pants down. But unless you knew exactly what to look for, you never would have noticed what it was. Another thing that we called out was better isolation between enterprise and campus loads, and customer loads. We're a customer of the data center. We're not the reason that the campus data center exists. The campus data center exists primarily for enterprise loads, things that keep the university up and running. And so there's a big question, about why was it that my one server that caught fire took down an entire campus of 45,000 people for 3 days. How did that happen? So I have a lot of professional thoughts and observations about this. As I said, there's no NTSB for the data center. There's no third party in charge. You're going to have to figure out a way to work with each other, or establish a single, in your organization, establish a body of people who have this job internally. But it's going to be hard because you'll have to deal with external vendors. Someone asked me, why doesn't something like this exist? And the number one reason why, we're not regulated, and people don't get killed in data centers for the most part. If this happened in an office building or a residential hall, yeah, there would be a lot more investigation, and it'd be happening a lot differently than it did here. However, given the fact that each and every single one of us met pretty much for the first time that week and didn't know each other from any other random stranger on the street, we actually worked pretty well together. We all acted professionally. We all joked together. And hopefully, these are people who will all reach out to each other for expertise and resources later on, should another event, hopefully not another fire, happen again in the future. As I said, there's no NTSB. We had a lot of different investigations happen on campus and off campus about this. And there was no master investigation to tie it all together. So unless I asked the data center for their post-event review, I never would have gotten half the material for this talk. If I didn't talk to campus IT on a regular basis, I would have never known about all the little things that went wrong on campus. But they all did their post-mortem separately. All the departments that were affected by this did their own post-event retrospectives separately. And I don't have access to those, so I can't tell you what they learned, which is probably the saddest thing about this kind of lack of transparency and investigation and reporting. And part of it comes down to responsibility and blame, and the way that people in this kind of situation like to always tend to fall back on responsibility and blame. I would love to show you pictures. You would probably love to see the pictures. I would love to tell you, do not buy this particular model of server with this particular part unless you know to replace the part, because that would save you from our particular circumstance. But everyone involved in this process was concerned about blame. We're concerned about blame taken unfairly by the manufacturers and the vendors. We're concerned about different parts of campus taking blame that they don't deserve. A lot of the secrecy, a lot of the reason why I can't show you things is fear about blame, which is really sad because these manufacturers, these vendors, are actually some of the best in the industry. Whatever passes for industry standards in our industry, they exceed them, which may not be saying much, but it also means that they are so very far ahead of the pack that I want to work with them again. I really wish I remembered what it was that I redacted so I could tell you what it was about. That's what happens when I redact things. I don't remember them anymore, which is probably what legal wants. So I want you to take away, I don't want to just give you an answer of saying, don't buy this equipment, because that doesn't solve the problem. I want to give you the tools to help keep you from suffering the same class of problems. So what do? You got to ask your vendors. Do you have hardware advisories? When you know that something is wrong with your systems, do they tell you? How do you find out? How do you get that information? When you send a server back that has a problem, a power supply that doesn't work, a failed component on a motherboard, or a blinky light that stopped working for no good reason, do they tell you why? Do they tell you, hey, wow, we found a class of problem with that entire line of servers, and you need to send them back? Or, hey, that's a known problem. Here's a URL to something that will tell you what's going on. Do they tell you that? Some manufacturers do a much better job. Some manufacturers don't care. And ultimately, it's upon us, people like us, to ask the hard question and say, hey, vendor, are you doing right by us? And I want you to compare this with security vulnerabilities. This is not to say that the way that companies disclose security vulnerabilities is great. It's actually not that great. They do it because they get dragged along kicking and screaming. But it's still better than the vast majority of, it's still better than the way that the vast majority of companies out there deal with the way they disclose problems with their hardware and whether or not it's a risk to you or your data center. You should ask your data center, how do you deal with these things? How do you deal with emergencies, fire suppression? How do you deal with isolation between different classes of loads? Do they even consider this? Do your critical systems get tested? How often? Do you know if there are weird random circular dependencies between them if you start again from a cold start? Do you have any in-house facilities of your own? Do you have a small lab somewhere where you have test equipment? Do you have a staging data center? Does it receive the same kind of scrutiny? Because I bet you if you have those kinds of small in-house facilities, they're probably inside of an office building where people work 8 to 12 hours a day. And so that's a big problem. Ask everybody, how resilient are dial tone services? Does IPv4 and IPv6 continue to work? Does DHCP still work? How do you communicate when things don't work? Do you have emergency communication systems? We have 3 of them, and all of them worked. Other places have none. They rely upon knowing who to text in an emergency and hoping that everyone's got the call tree memorized. Do you rehearse post-event retrospectives? Do you get people from different disciplines on campus or in your organization together to work with each other so they know how to communicate with each other before something happens and so that they don't have to figure it out after the fact? We got lucky. I've seen other retrospectives basically go to hell because legal didn't want to talk to engineering anymore, or engineering didn't want to talk to legal anymore, or they didn't know how to talk to each other, so the insurance investigator had to go and sort it out. That's not a good investigation. And how thoroughly do you track down spurious errors? This is the one thing that I could have done, that my group could have done to prevent this kind of event from happening, and we missed it. Everybody missed something, but we missed that one. And I'm going to close with a personal comment. This could have gone much worse, but for some really good choices about a decade ago and some really fortunate timing. I was in a data center 28 minutes before it happened. I left only because I got hungry. I could have been standing in front of the machine that caught fire or behind it. They could have put in a CO2 flooding system for fire suppression. You have a 30-second warning from the time that the smoke detectors go off till the system gets activated. It's approximately a 25-second fast walk from the back of the data center to the front of the data center in case you forget where the back entrance is. So I'm personally very glad that they have a human-safe fire suppression system. This is a really good thing to tell your manufacturers when they think it's not that big a deal that a system caught fire. It goes really far. This also really brings home a recent tragedy in Oakland. Also brought home really brought home how important all of this is. A friend of mine speaking about this said, when we tech an event, he works in event promotions and event management and event AV. When you're working an event, when you are working in an organization, you have something important in your hands, whether it's someone's life or someone's research or someone's work. A lot of us kind of said, oh, not our problem. That's not something we do. Or we missed it. No big deal. 6 other people will catch it. But what if all 7 people catch it? And so I want to impress upon you, this is all really important stuff. Even if all you have is one little tiny piece of it, your tiny piece can be really, really vital. Like I said, if I had caught this, this would never have happened. If the manufacturer had caught it, this would never have happened. If a number of 16, somewhere around 3 to 4 different vendors had caught this never would have happened. But unfortunately, all of us missed the ball somehow. And so we took our campus down for 3 days, and the one saving grace is that nothing was lost except time. I know other places that have not been so fortunate. Some have actually lost life. There was a bank about 5 years ago that lost somebody due to activation of their fire suppression system. It was a CO2 system. They suffocated. I know plenty of places that have lost data. They have lost data, they have lost irreplaceable work. This is our equivalent of losing a life. We're not supposed to let this happen. So I want to end with that note, and I have really powered through these slides. I will take your questions, any comments, and if you're interested in talking more about this, my manager has asked that we schedule a BOF at about 8:30. It'll be in this room. If you have fire and other disaster stories to tell, come together and let's have a couple of beers over that. I have no cute kitten pictures though, like Aveline did, because I kind of went through them all trying to prepare this talk. They were my self-soothing. But I'll take questions.
I wanted to make a quick comment. So I take a medication that has to be injected into a muscle. And I've taken it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I have to move around. I'm not allowed to use the same place every time. Mm-hmm. And every now and then I'll hit a vein. And if that happens, I see blood in the syringe. I take it out. I can't use it. I have to toss it. I have to ask for another one. That causes what's called an adverse event to be put in a database somewhere.
Yes.
At that point, I will spend around 20 to 40 hours talking to people over the next 6 to 8 months about the adverse event.
Yes.
And I'll have conversations like, did this happen at work? Well, no, it didn't end up at work. Well, what would happen if you didn't take your medication? Well, I'd probably die. Well, if you died, you wouldn't be able to go to work. So we need to talk to the insurance company that has to do with it. You see my point. In your slide, several times you mentioned that there's no National Transportation Safety Board for data centers, and that's not necessarily a totally bad thing.
It's true. This is neither a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
It did definitely make certain parts of this investigation not happen the way a lot of us would have liked. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that an NTSB-like body is the right thing for something like this.
Right.
What I really care about, and this came from the previous talk, is I care about the end goal, which is dissemination of information, right. Prevention of future events, good outcomes. Mm-hmm. I'm not particularly tied to how we get there.
Yeah.
But that one difference between us and a regulated industry does make having good investigations a lot harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
You talked about maybe commenting on the latent heat.
Oh, God, yes. So, repercussions. So the FM200 system has been depleted. Your only backup in case of further fire happening is the water system, the sprinklers. They are designed to activate at approximately 165 degrees Fahrenheit at ceiling temperature. So if the heat continues to rise at the ceiling, and the smoke detectors have already activated, water starts raining down upon you, or at least upon the area that got too hot. This is something we'd like to avoid. But there's more because of that UPS room. The UPS room was continuing to rise in temperature because of the lack of HVAC. That heat, while it tends to rise, also conducts downward through the floor into the data center. If I had brought my little IR thermometer, I would have measured the temperature of the ceiling, and I probably would have been really frightened. Yeah.
Now that you've gone through this process, have you changed the way that you will respond to an incident like this? What have you modified now that you've gone through this in an actual scenario?
Let's see here. I got a couple of slides on this. I hope somewhere. So let's see, at a campus level, our campus IT group is looking at turning what should be a disaster recovery system into more of a active recovery system. So we do have offsite locations at San Diego that are intended for things like earthquakes, where we're down for 2 days, 4 days a week. We do actually have active, usable live replicas of everything in the campus data center there for critical business systems, including authentication and DHCP. They were not activated because the system that they were designed to be used with was designed for manual activation that's disruptive. They're now looking at ways to make that much more automatic, a lot more, for lack of a better term, DevOpsy, where we can deploy it with a couple of small commands, not manual DNS changes.
So I see you had to redact just 1 or 2 things.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of transparency, so I'm curious if, so there's no repetition of effort. Do you know if anybody's already filed the FOIA request?
Shane, can I answer this question?
I didn't take FOIA into account when I was thinking about this.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I did. I have not been made aware of any FOIA requests by the Office of General Counsel at the University of California.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like you might be getting one.
Great talk, by the way, John.
Thank you.
So one of the issues was the circular dependency.
Yes.
Is that something that could have been detected from doing fire drills without just totally doing a yearly total power down?
The conversation I had with the data center manager is that they probably could have caught it 2 years ago when we had a campus-wide power outage that, for other cultural reasons, resulted in shutting down the campus data center. They could have found if they had had a chance to actually test it at that time. They weren't able to take advantage of that opportunity due to the impact of the campus center being down on certain emergency communication systems, which were later farmed out so that they could remain working this time. Some other people on campus think that they might have been able to cache it, that they actually had poured over the designs a second time after commissioning of the data center, because there have been changes made since we commissioned the data center in 2004.
So are you considering doing a yearly shutdown drill?
Funny you should say that. So I'm going to guess as a result of this incident, there is now a yearly emergency power off system test of every single data center space on campus. I think that's approximately 300 different data center spaces, ranging from the really well outfitted but small closet to the 1,000 square foot data center space that I manage in our department.
It's funny how you could get approval for that kind of thing now.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Let no emergency go unwasted.
Yes, true.
So my name's Ray, I'm from Colorado State University. In a couple of my previous workplaces, we've had data centers that don't have a gas suppression system and rely entirely on sprinklers, mostly
Yes.
for cost. Can you comment on what you think would have happened if you did not have a gas suppression system?
And only water.
And would the server itself fire, do you think it would have spread?
Absolutely. There's enough videos from places like the National Fire Prevention Association that show the effectiveness of a gaseous fire suppression system versus water. It's a matter of seconds versus minutes to tens of minutes.
Okay.
We're not kidding when we say smoke monster. I mean, the video is just incredible to watch.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's the last question. Thank you all very much. And if you have any other questions, come find me. We will be here at 8:30.